conference at 2 p.m, 1400 hours, Australian Eastern Standard Time, after releasing their report a couple of hours ago into local government corruption. So that's all happening today, as well as the great excitement of having Mr. Sowerby with us. So we will get straight to that now. Mark Sowerby is Queensland's first chief entrepreneur, appointed by the Premier in October 2016 and whose one-year term ends this month. Mark is the founder of Blue Sky Alternative Investments Limited, an ASX-listed alternative asset manager, investing across private equity, venture capital, private real estate, water, infrastructure, hedge funds and agriculture. 10 years after starting Blue Sky, Mark handed the business over to the executive team to spend more time with his wife and 2 sons and to help with projects that have a positive social impact. In 2015, Mark received the University of Queensland Vice-Chancellor's Alumni Excellence Award, was recognised as Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year for Queensland and completed a successful crossing of the English Channel. He serves on the board of the Starlight Children's Foundation and Racing Queensland. Mark is originally from Warren in Western New South Wales, studying agricultural science at the University of Queensland before completing a graduate diploma of Applied Finance and Investment through the Securities Institute of Australia and a Masters of Business Administration. I feel completely inadequate. I don't know about you. Mark has told the Media Club he'll talk today about the talent he has seen over the past 12 months, the places, spaces and people who are supporting entrepreneurs, the potential impact of the startup sector in Queensland and where to buy a good t-shirt. Please welcome Mark Sowerby to the stage.
Well, I can assure you that the Crime and Corruption Commission at 2 o'clock has got nothing to do with me. I've had enough trouble, though, being, I think, a private citizen in the public sector, and I've seen what it is that they have to deal with, and I don't envy them at all. And so what I'm going to do, just briefly today, I'd like to keep the speech reasonably short. So I always think the Q&A is much more interesting than the speech, but I would like to try and set some context for you all over what's happened across the state, because one of the real challenges in the private sector, whether it be the startup space or scale-up space, wherever it might be, is that there are no screens for this. You can't look it up. You have to hear about it. Networks matter. And so what I'll do is take you through the journey of the year, the things that have happened. I'll talk to some of the government programs that I've seen that have worked and the things that I think are making a difference. And then we can sit down and you can hammer me with the questions, and nothing's off limits. It's always good fun when someone's asked something that's quite difficult. But of course, you know, my time's coming to an end. I said that I would do a year for free, and that way the Premier, of course, would get her money's worth. And luckily for all of us, the rightful chief, Steve Baxter, the shark himself, is going to step up. And Steve, of course, is a legendary entrepreneur who importantly has used his success to give back and invested his own money to grow local talent through River City Labs, and we can't thank him enough for that. I did really, in many respects, end up in this position by accident and keep the seat warm for him this past year, and now you're going to see somebody who can really apply their energy and effort to Queensland to really move the dial. I can't really look back at the past year without going back even further to late 2014, when Dr. Josh Lerner, a Harvard professor and the world's leading expert in innovation-led economic policy, wrote a report for Queensland. At the time, I was really in the thick of it at Blue Sky. We were 8 years old and just getting traction as a listed company, investing across private markets in Australia. And venture capital and early-stage private equity were a really key part of that portfolio. And we could see this wave coming. A tsunami of talent, of entrepreneurs and opportunities with global impact. And we wanted to make sure we could ride the wave as a state and not get wiped out. And you can't argue with the world's leading expert in the field, Josh Lerner, someone who works with the World Bank and NASA. You sit up, you listen, and you take action. So I reached out to Dr. Arun Sharma from QUT, Professor Ian Watson from UQ, Nick Matthew from Griffith, who's here today, and Tim Brailsford from Bond, so all of the 4 larger universities in Queensland, as I had no clue how to get this done. And with Mario Panisi's help from Life Sciences Queensland, his last name is Italian, he is mafia as far as I'm concerned, he manages to get stuff done. We pulled it together and with government to commission the report. And it was the Newman government, and to Campbell's credit, he got it. He understood the need for everyone to get on the same page and set the right policy. And in summary, here is what Josh said. Set the table. Government had to prepare the table, get the conditions right for business, but it didn't need to serve the meal too. Borrow from others, don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from the rest of the world, they're 20 years ahead. Don't repeat their mistakes. Measure, evaluate and revise. Try a variety of approaches and double down on the ones that get traction and make an impact. And keep it reasonable, work within your area of control and really focus on the state level, don't worry about the federal issues. And of course, most importantly with public funds, be cost effective. Keep it lean, make a lot of smaller investments, small bets and more of them. Josh said he'd never seen a state with more R and less D, more research and less development than anywhere else on the planet. The Smart State policy had invested about $5 billion and developed talent, infrastructure, collaboration and commercialisation, but there was clearly more work to be done in the development side. As a state, we had untapped potential, so we had a chance to connect those ideas, innovations and research to the development wave. Josh also said to build bridges with the rest of the world, to enhance the skills of local entrepreneurs, develop the angel community and institutional investors, fund commercialisation projects and provide matched fund investments with risk capital alongside. And one other recommendation was to create an office of the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur and to quote, champion and shepherd these programs. I've been called a lot of things, but never a champion or a shepherd. And in 2015, the Palaszczuk government was elected. And they started to deliver on the Learner Report, and suddenly, Advanced Queensland was born. The leaner, meaner startup cousin of Smart State, with a focus on development, commercialisation, and critically, entrepreneurship. And now we have a bipartisan policy framework that if we play our cards right, will not get distracted or diluted by politics. Advanced Queensland is a 4-year, $420 million investment on track to address our soft spot, the missing D of development in our state. They've looked overseas at what has worked, then taken lots of small bets through targeted programs to kickstart development, measured the impact, doubled down on the ones that are working, and helped set the table for business to get on with it. I have to say something about Leanne Enoch. Leanne Enoch is the minister leading this. I didn't know Leanne before I started this role. One thing I've learned is that good people do good things, and Leanne's a good person. She doesn't just have an ego, just gusto. She works her guts out, and she has led the change across the city. They're running close to 45 Advanced Queensland programs with more in other departments. It'd be like a shopping list to read them all, so I'll share some of the highlights for you. Programs like Hot Desk, based on the successful Startup Chili campaign, that is building bridges nationally and internationally, attracting startup talent to set up shop in Queensland. Almost 300 startups have applied to come to Queensland from 41 countries and also across Australia. We've selected 53 over 2 rounds, and they're spread out across the state from Cairns to Bundaberg, Toowoomba to the Gold Coast. Applications for round 2 were up by 60%, so we're gaining traction. And we're gaining an international reputation as a startup hotspot. I was up at Rocky in August with 3 Hot Desk founders, and they were mentoring local businesses. There were more than 130 people at that event, and everyone absolutely loved the energy, advice and expertise these startups were happy to share. One of the founders was Big Ty Adams from Trumbull Unmanned, a drone company for the energy sector, in Texas. You can imagine the Texan in Rocky. He was an absolute rock star. He'd been in the country for only a week, and he put his hand up to go to Rockhampton and give back to our community and help others on their entrepreneurial journeys. As Steve would say, giving first. Not only do the Hot Desk teams bring their expertise to the state, but they also open a door to international venture capital, so we can start to build those networks and relationships with global VCs and get them to have their sights firmly set on Queensland. And these businesses are staying. More than 65% of the first round of hot deskers stayed in Queensland. We're also taking Queenslanders to the world, to international hotspots through Startup Catalyst, like the delegation of Queensland ad tech innovators who went to Israel recently to learn on practices and build international networks that are essential for growth of global startups. And our regional Queensland community leaders who went to the US to learn from the best in the US, places like Boulder, people like Brad Feld, and companies like Techstar and Facebook. This group built connections and bonds, creating a support network of regional leaders that are growing their own communities across Queensland. People like Eleanor from Bundaberg and Troy from Cairns, Christine from Longreach and Jared in Mackay, who are now part of the Advancing Regional Innovation Program, or ARIP, that has 110 partners and 13 incubators that are growing across the regional ecosystem, building a local entrepreneurial skill base and providing entrepreneurial education. We've seen the number of co-working spaces and entrepreneurial programs double over the past 18 months in Queensland, supporting hundreds of entrepreneurs to back themselves and have a go. In the last year, more than 29,000 people were exposed to entrepreneurship through events and programs supported by Advance Queensland, and they're producing outcomes. Over 30 employees and contractors are working in startups out of split spaces in Mackay. More than 150 entrepreneurs have passed through Fire Station 101 at Ipswich and the Generator in Bundaberg. These spaces have delivered 100 plus events to more than 1,300 potential entrepreneurs, a Queensland army. This groundswell has also seen angel investment groups form, and it's been a very big part of every regional trip that I've taken this year, to sit down with potential local angels and talk about the way investing can have an impact on their local communities. The regions are brimming with sophisticated investors, and now they're starting to see how they can make a difference in their own backyards through angel investment, and already we've seen groups form in Cairns and Bundaberg, and it's just the start. Bundaberg called theirs Fundaberg. Only in Bundaberg, right? Advance Queensland is about to roll out a pilot program to kickstart angel groups in regional Queensland, ticking off another one of Josh's recommendations. They'll call for expressions of interest from parties with the right experience and connections to make it happen, and with the ability to invest their own money. And now to my personal favourite, and that's Ignite Ideas. It meets the learner recommendation of commercialisation. This program has worked. With an original budget of 10 million over 3 years, Advance Queensland has now committed $26.5 million to Ignite in under 2 years, and that's because it's working. And just as Learner recommended, be agile, shift resources where you find the programs are having the biggest impact. Ignite has supported 203 businesses with grants of $100,000 to $250,000 to get to market faster and commercialise their product, service or process. They must be market ready or very close, and this is just the start they need to develop faster, directly hitting our soft spot, the missing D in our ecosystem. And government has stepped up with Ignite Ideas too. I kept hearing how long the application process was taking and the business needed a faster answer, common problems. I asked the government team managing this to halve the time it took, and they nailed it. It went from 5 months to 2 months, from round 2 to round 3. I've met people around Queensland who have absolutely flown with these grants. They see it as their big break and they want to deliver. They feel an obligation to deliver to the state. Companies like Woods Foods and Gundawindi who are developing a retail line of pulse and grain products with huge global potential, capitalising on the massive export market of chickpeas worth $793 million to the state and Queensland's fastest growing export. Clearly a business is now a step closer to cracking a huge global market. And finally, the match funding piece, investment piece that Learner recommended is being met by the Business Development Fund, providing $125,000 to $2.5 million co-investment funding, where investors step up and the government meets them dollar for dollar to invest in Queensland businesses that are poised for global impact and success. The BDF is a $40 million fund that has backed 14 Queensland businesses with $15.9 million in matched funding. I know of one recipient who is on track to pay back their funding in less than 1 year. Their growth has been so fast they can now give back to Queensland's ecosystem. So what about the Office of the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, the last item on Dr. Lerner's list? Well, the first 6 months was mostly about setting up, getting structures and protocols in place, all the boring stuff, but also stock-taking the state to see what we already had. For me, the first big step forward came in March, with a regional tour delivering 14 events in 10 towns over 4 days on a mate's private jet that I borrowed that reached an audience of 1,500 people. We took a great crew of Queensland entrepreneurial talent with us, including Steve Baxter, who needs no introduction, Patrice Brown, 2016 Queensland Entrepreneur of the Year for the Telstra Business Women's Awards, Stephen Phillips, artificial intelligence legend, who created We Are Hunted and sold it to Twitter pre-IPO, Lucas Patchett from Orange Sky Laundry, and Chris Titley, Morgan stockbroker, who's overrated, startup podcaster, obviously he's here, and our in-house MC for the tour. Our focus was to share our stories of what it's like to grow a business, build a startup, and above all, change your life and become an entrepreneur. Now, Patrice is based in Rockhampton. Steve Baxter grew up in Cloncurry, Emerald, and went to school in Rockhampton. Stephen Phillips was from Charters Towers. And Lucas Patchett has a man bun. And we wanted to show that geography and how you wear your hair didn't matter. That in fact, being based in the regions gave you the edge in persistence and resilience, the two key factors that I see for success on each and every occasion. We met some stars along the way. Russ Broad from Charters Towers, who had this Corker app that can help people in an emergency as an ex-policeman and prevent crime. He's now made the national boot camp for the Duke of York's pitch at the Palace Challenge. And most impressively, the Power Shot kids in Cairns that went on to win the National Eye Award for the app they've developed that measures the speed of a ball. The regions are brimming with talent, and I did another 20 regional trips during the year, sharing stories and the stuff I learned and encouraging more people to change their lives and become entrepreneurs. We also launched our series of pop-up entrepreneur events, revealing a mystery Queensland entrepreneur to the audience. No prejudgment or filters. You come along for the ride and be open to what will be shared with you on the night. We've had the likes of Adrian DeMarco from Technology One, Maxine Horn from Vita Group, Dennis Wagner, who's obviously just built a pretty big airport of his own, Susanna George from The Urban List, Mike Knapp from Shoes of Prey, and heaps of others. An outstanding group of Queensland entrepreneurs, all sharing their journeys and helping to inspire the next wave of talent. We've reached thousands of people, with many inspired to start their own businesses. No better example of this is our investor pitch night at the Trifford, with over 1,000 people attending the first event. We flipped the pitch from startups pitching to investors, which is what it always works, to investors pitching to startups, and had angels of venture capital from around the country telling startups why they should choose them for investment. Without doubt, the best moment of the night was my stitch-up of Steve with Glenn Richards, the other shark, judging Steve Baxter's pitch. Didn't go well, and the vet took down the shark. My Twitter account was humming that night. That's another landmark for the year, me joining Twitter, sort of. My humble following of close to 3,500 is somewhat dwarfed by Steve Baxter's 26,800. I do have more than Chris Titley though. And we might see a bit of growth here as Steve takes over as chief. We've also had a movie night launching Luke and Ian's startup movie, The New Hustle, a live broadcast with ABC Radio Brisbane from the precinct, free advisor nights, and delivered over 300 speeches from school kids to retirees, community groups to corporates, universities to government. All up this year, we've held a ridiculous number of events, visited most of Queensland, and connected with more than 6,500 people. I am truly sick of the sound of my own voice. On top of this, we've had Benny Southall, Best Job in the World winner, run the Venturer program, a world first, getting entrepreneurs out of their comfort zone for a week to build their mental and physical resilience. An absolute must to be able to go the distance as an entrepreneur. A wise investment in people that in turn means your financial investment in the business is in safer hands with a greater chance of success as you are backing entrepreneurs with fortitude. First trip in July took 20 Queensland doers and our startup ecosystem to the Whitsundays, and the next one in November will tackle the wilds of Tasmania. Josh Lerner gave me one policy objective for the year, because it's only a year. Sales, not subsidies. A sale is more important to a startup than a grant or funding. Sales are the heart and soul of a startup. If you're meeting the market needs and getting sales, then you're winning. Startups die because they have no sales. Government is a huge customer, spending $14 billion a year on supplies and services and a further $4 billion on building and maintaining infrastructure. And that is some buying power. This came from in 2010. The UK government pledged to spend at least 25% of its goods and services with small businesses. And in 2015, on the back of that success, set a new target of 33% by 2020. So there are some clues from Josh Lerner here. Look overseas and borrow from the projects that have worked. And this one in the UK was really making a difference. Buy Queensland is giving local suppliers the edge, and I'm really pleased these types of programs are being pushed on both sides of government. It's a real competitive advantage for Queensland, and when we look back on this policy in a few times, I think we'll see that it's been good for the state, and particularly in the regions that need the most help. For startups and scale-ups, it's not necessarily about the total dollar of a contract. $20,000 could be the little seed which sows the beginnings of an important business that no one saw coming. We're also taking this to the precinct too, the startup hub in Fortitude Valley, where our office is located. We're regularly hosting the heads of all government departments to the precinct and getting startups to pitch to them and finding startups that can meet government needs. So is it working, and are we making a difference? And my experience for the year, surprisingly, as a cynic, was yes. Last year's Startup Muster Report, a national survey of Australia's startup ecosystem, showed Queensland ahead of Victoria, second only to New South Wales, with 19% of founders in our state. And that figure, slightly more than half, were outside of Brisbane. In the regions, the balance that was way ahead of the other states that were all densely based in the major cities. I expect the next Startup Muster Report due in November will show that Queensland is closing the gap on New South Wales and extending our lead on Victoria. Advanced Queensland will continue to drive jobs. It supported 1,650 innovators whose projects are driving 4,821 jobs, quite a precise number, but it's on the J-curve and you can see that over time. So in September 2016, we measured that as being about 748 jobs. In December, it was 1,400. In March 2017, it was over 2,000, and now we're looking at just under 5,000. They're not new figures, you've heard them before, but this might help you give some context. All of the jobs growth comes from small businesses, not large. Over a decade of blue sky nationally, we created more than 2,200 jobs to the end of last December and supported over 5,900 jobs through our business and investments in Queensland. There were more than 1,400 jobs in Queensland alone and supporting 2,000 jobs here. And we were just one startup. Imagine what our Queensland startup army can do. Next year, we will see some incredible opportunities. Myriad is going to be the most influential startup event in Asia Pacific. And the Qantas Valley to the Valley flight, Silicon Valley to Fortitude Valley, is going to be an experience of a lifetime. I just hope they get here safely. It's the perfect example of our state's culture. Qantas was a Queensland startup and is now a global company, and they're giving back to the state where it all began. You'll see Arup hit its strides and produce more regional startups, and angel groups will start to invest in that talent. Advanced Queensland will continue to trigger development, and Buy Queensland will put money back into the businesses in our state. You'll also see the real chief take the stage. I can tell you, having got to know him, that Steve is an exceptional person. He changed his life through sheer hard work and has now dedicated himself to making a substantial difference to our state. We are lucky to have him, just don't make him grumpy. It's not hard. And this time, I will retire, take a break and enjoy the sanctuary of home and time with Heidi and the boys. I'll enjoy seeing lots of blank spaces in my paper diary and having more time with no emails or phone access. And if the results of Blue Sky are anything to go by, where their profits went up 50% after I left, then I think the office of Queensland Chief Entrepreneur is about to experience its own J-curve. Thank you. That's the boring bit.
Don't sell yourself short. You're an entrepreneur, you're supposed to talk yourself up. And I must begin by apologising profusely for inadvertently linking you with the Crime and Corruption Commission 2 o'clock announcement about local government corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no connection between Mark Sowerby and local government connection. I apologise profusely for that.
Yes, absolutely.
But let's start talking about why a government needs a position of a chief entrepreneur. Governments are inherently risk averse. They're elected by us to follow the rules, to be financially accountable. Entrepreneurs break rules and then go off the beaten path. How is it not a contradiction in terms, as you have found it this year, for governments and entrepreneurial endeavours to go hand in hand?
Yeah, I mean, the problem for government everywhere in the world, it's not a Queensland, state or Australian federal problem. Everywhere, Josh tells me, is the machinery of government and the permafrost and the challenges of getting things done is getting harder and harder and harder. And partly that's the media cycle and all the other things that go wrong, but it's getting really hard for government to make things happen. So really I think what government hopes to get out of a Chief Entrepreneur Office is, firstly, if you think about the Office of Chief Scientist, they've been really successful in being a source of truth. And I think you only have to look at how successful the R side has been with government to see that for government having a source of truth they can go to ask advice, to get the right ideas, to link across into the private sector, because those two groups are speaking different languages, absolutely. And in many ways our job's to translate. So as a source of truth, I've found the last 6 months we've had a lot of different departments in government, both state and national, coming to us and saying, what's working? How do we do it? Tell us what you're seeing. We've tried this isn't working, tell us why. And they're listening to us and just going ahead and doing what they need to do. It's just as important, I think, for the private sector to have someone to come and talk to, particularly in that small business and lower space. I think governments find it really hard to attack startups and small business. It's easy to go and talk to Virgin, or to go and talk to a big corporate and go and talk to Qantas or talk to BHP and say, can you come here please and we'll get 700 more jobs. But the reality is that all the evidence tells you all the jobs is coming through this space. And they've got the Office of Small Business Commissioner and those things. But the reality is that the Chief Entrepreneur's Office out of Israel, which is where it started, has been incredibly successful at marshalling government resources and pointing it in the right direction to achieve an outcome, and giving really good information back to government to say these things are working. And we've given them direct feedback on programs that are not working and said, like Ignite Ideas, can you please double, triple down, do more and more of this? The other thing, I think government knows, the good people in government that I met know that government needs to be disrupted itself. So Australia, in many ways, Chris, is becoming more and more institutionalised. And it's not just government, it's also our universities, our corporates. I mean, anyone that works in a big corporate knows it's bloody impossible to get anything done. And we found that dealing with those institutions. So if we don't disrupt our own institutions, then what will happen is that, like the retail industry, Amazon will come over and Amazon us. And either that wealth will be transferred overseas, which is what's going to happen in retail, or we disrupt ourselves internally. And we've had 25 years of uninterrupted economic growth and we're getting fat and lazy, and this is one of the ways to tighten up a bit.
I was interested by your reference to Israel in your piece this morning. We might ask you more about that, but my friend Shane Doherty from Channel 9 can't win the bottle of red wine today because he has to leave very soon. He has time constraints, but I don't want him to go without the following humdinger.
Good one.
Win the bottle of red wine and wants to give it to me. Chris knows where to find me. Mark, I was interested in some of your comments. I don't know if we mentioned this, but there's an election coming. And I wonder what you think a change of government might do to the Office of Entrepreneur and all that you've achieved in the past 12 months.
Yeah, thanks for that, Shane. Okay, so I'm terrible at the politics. I mean, one of the problems for me, Shane, in this whole, in my sort of chief entrepreneur journey is because Blue Sky had no experience with government and I had none. And I'm terrible with the politics. My assumption, I've spoken to both sides of politics. I mean, and Leanne has encouraged me to do that. I've spoken to the opposition. I know a fair few of them over the years, and I don't think that there'll be, I mean, it was really their policy, to be quite frank. So I'd be surprised if there were any changes. A lot of people have said to me this is the first government policy they've seen that's actually had serious impact in a short period of time. I think it'll be fine. But I still worry about it because the history of Queensland in recent years has been that we're on a yo-yo. and we're flicking from one policy to another. And I think the best thing that whoever gets elected can do for Queensland is to just let us continue on doing our thing. It doesn't need more money, Shane. It doesn't need anything extra. There's things you could recalibrate at the edges, but I think the best thing we can have is stability and let this thing continue to grow. And I don't see or hear anything from either side of politics that's going to make that any different. But I don't know for sure, because I've been surprised both to the upside and downside in this role.
Let me go back to that point I was making with you about Israel. Elaborate on what you were saying in the paper this morning. What makes Israel so entrepreneurial? Well,
the reason that these things happen, so these things don't happen in places that don't need it. You have to have a story and you want to change the destiny, and whether that's as an entrepreneur, as an individual, or as a state, or even a region. Like if you look at the Sunshine Coast as an example, now we saw at Blue Sky, the Sunshine Coast was by far the most smashed in the GFC. But we haven't had 25 years of uninterrupted growth. The Sunshine Coast got absolutely torched. And what was really interesting out of that crisis, because they had a crisis, was that the community got together, all the leaders, the people that were leading that community, not necessarily in terms of title, but in terms of action, got together and said, we need to change our destiny. And they're building an entirely new CBD on their public golf course at Mooloolaba. And not only that, they've brought everything back into that. They've got a whole range of they've extended the runway of the airport. The infrastructure set the table for their economy to change. And as a result of that, Bernard Salt reported earlier in the year that the most entrepreneurial region in Australia is the Sunshine Coast, which is quite cool. And you would never have picked that. And so I thought that was an interesting analogy for Israel as well, because what's happened there is that their economy was actually pretty horrible. There was a lot of money coming back from the diaspora around the world, but the economy was pretty bad. They had no resources. What they did have is they had a military, everyone goes through the military, and they had a really deep technical base from their military experience. And they didn't know how to bring all that together. And so they set up this Office of Chief Entrepreneur 10 years ago. And they spent the first 3 years trying to work out what are we going to do with our country. And then the Office of Chief Entrepreneur actually delivered a plan. And out of that, within years, they've been able to attract venture capital because those from overseas built their own VC business. Their jobs growth is exploding, the wealth is exploding, and they're doing it without any natural resources at all in a reasonably difficult part of the world. And also, with a group of people that really probably have a mindset of that's where they're an outlier. And what you see in life, Australia is pretty fat and happy. Like pretty much if you want to have a job now, you can get it, and you can feed your family if you want to, by and large. And so what's going to make us do this? And either it's going to be externally imposed upon us, as it is in the retail industry, or we're going to impose it on ourselves. And we see that with entrepreneurs. We see there's people in Blue Sky, I saw that the best people we had there were ones that had been through hardship or imposed it on themselves to try and build their character and strength and resilience and get out of their comfort zone. And so for Queensland, I think we need it more. And all the data tells you that Sydney and Melbourne can't do it. They will have an ecosystem and a startup space. And startups aren't that interesting, actually. Startups are interesting only as feedstock for scale-ups. Scale-ups are interesting. Businesses that are growing from 10 and 12 employees to 50 and 100. Now, that's really interesting, or 5,000. So you really want startups as feedstock for that. So can Queensland own this space? And I think we have to. We do have the regions. My big surprise for the year has been the regions. I'm from the country, obviously. I came out of that regional tour, Chris, with more energy than I've had for a long time.
Do you think Queensland does regions better than other states do regions?
Well, we have to, yes. But also, the reality is that if you're in Rockhampton, you're far enough away that Brisbane's not going to save you and government's not going to save you. So what you find in regional towns is that people have to do it themselves. I'll tell you a story I was in Gundawindi a couple of weeks ago. This great lady, Julia, there's always someone that glues the community together. Julia had organised 25 of the local business leaders to join me for a lunch. And this old bloke said to me, he said, "Oh, Mark," he said, "this entrepreneurship thing's a bit of bullshit, isn't it?" He said, "Why do we bother with that?" He says, "No entrepreneurs here." And then Julia says, "You idiots. said, okay, everyone here that started their own business, put your hand up. And all 25 put their hand up. And she said, you're entrepreneurs, you're tools, now just listen. And so, and because people don't think of entrepreneurs as just being someone that started a cafe, and that's what it is. Like if you start your own business, this is not some crazy tech or the old white shoe brigade from the property days. That's not entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is when you take control of your own destiny, start your own business. And if you go from 1 person to 2 employees, you've just increased the size of your business by 50%.
Anthony Marks from the Courier Mail is here today too. Thank you, Anthony.
Hello, Anthony.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, Mark. How are you? I'm just curious, Mark, do you think, is there a danger, however well-intentioned your efforts are, that you end up picking winners and losers, both in companies and industries, and thereby you tilt the playing field in the private sector?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a natural inclination to want to do that, I think. Historically, there's been an inclination to do that, Anthony, and I think everybody's learned that that's sometimes there's some obvious things to do, and sometimes you want to put some new strings to your bow. And so, for example, it would be insane of us not to have an artificial intelligence capability within this state, because that's a platform technology that's changing the world, and we really want to at least understand how it works. The beauty of startups and scale-ups is this is actually impossible anyway. And in fact, what I learned through the event, we looked at over 5,000 deals, Anthony, through Blue Sky, and what I learned was that picking winners was pretty hard, and you get some wrong. Mostly it's people alignment and their personal character and fortitude and having all their own money in that brings through the strength. But what you don't see is an ability to pick that an industry is going to take off, and generally. And I don't see any picking winners really at the advanced Queensland level. I don't see any other government policy stuff at all in my job, but I don't think there's any danger of that at all. And in fact, what this is really, it's a whole bunch of small bets, and you only really need 1 or 2 to take off. Like when I was, the way I've expressed it to the regional towns is I'm trying to get the local investors to invest locally in their own startups, because this is good for their community to get these businesses growing. And if they want to get to a position where their kids don't have to leave town to achieve all of their objectives, then they're going to have to provide more opportunities, and that's going to come through businesses that they haven't yet thought of. So it's actually impossible to pick them. I don't think that this program's doing that at all. I've seen no sort of bias. If there's any bias, Anthony, in the programs that I've seen, it's been to the regions. It's been like a skew to the regions to get more out there, and I think that's appropriate because they need the help and they don't have access to the capital that we do here. So I don't think that that's happening. I think there's one. I'll give you one mistake though that the government is making, which every government has made. There's about 40 countries that have done this program, and the only mistake that governments make, and they make in every single one. I remember Josh and I talking to Treasury about this, and he walked out and said, "I still can't believe that it's now 40 out of 40. Every government still thinks that geography matters." And starting a business in Queensland and having them shift to LA and take on the world and succeed is as good or better than having them just based here to create jobs just here. Because for sure, the good thing about Queensland is it's a bloody awesome place to live. Their family are here. They will circle back and come back and bring with them those contacts, networks and experiences. And I think we've got to get away from having this geography, and every single country that's put these programs out has kept the geography rule, and every single one of them in the end has killed it dead. So that needs to go. But other than that, I think these programs, the winners are picking themselves, and the best entrepreneurs will pick themselves over time, and we should be happy to accept that it's a random event, but for sure something good will happen.
As an amateur looking on, I've never really thought about scale-ups as opposed to startups, and it was interesting to hear you talk about scale-ups. Should people in this room be thinking more about scale-ups than startups?
Yeah, because that's the interesting piece. The thing that scale-ups need, by then they've sort of worked out what their product is, and they've hired a few people, and they've made a few mistakes, and that's the point at which you need private investment, Chris. And one of our big soft spot, which Steve's going to focus on 2 things this year, which is the regions again, because we just loved it, Steve and I. We just loved the difference it was making out there, and we think that that's our strength. The second piece was really driving this venture capital investment piece. The problem is it's not just about money. Like when you're banking, like you get good bankers, basically banking's banking, right? Whatever. So, but venture capital is completely different. It's a partnership mindset. You've got to learn it over a long period of time. You've got to make mistakes. You've got to be a high empathy and EQ to understand people, because mostly about 75% of the answer is in the person or the people. And so what we've got to try and do is build out good venture capitalists, good investors. Now, there are some in town, some family offices and some individuals, and we're engaging them to get involved. Steve's one, he's done quite a lot of it and made a lot of mistakes and got some stuff right, as have we. One of the key things we need is more people that are good at that. And private capital is going to be the key to that. But here's the challenge. So this is my theory. This was something we experienced at Blue Sky. What we found was that by and large, the people that knew us would prefer, they didn't see the financial reward of investing with us as being worth the risk of losing the friendship. Now, only Australians think like that. You could argue New Zealanders, but who cares? And also maybe the English to some extent. But that's why, it's that characteristic, that sort of that mateship, that deep friendship that has stopped all the world wars. And so the problem with that is that for this whole thing to succeed, you need a lot of local investment. So the way we pitch that is you should start these angel groups, you should put your own money in, you should back these groups, especially people that are in business that have done it before. Get involved and accept that you might lose all your money, and a positive outcome for you 5 years in is that you've got it all back. Think of it as charity and social good. And then by then it will get better and you will have changed the destiny of your town. And if you're in Rocky and you get one business going that employs 500 people, you've actually changed that town. You see a lot more of that in America, where they have 1 or 2 big businesses in a regional town. We don't really have that, and I think we're going to have to build them from the inside rather than import them.
We might throw the questions open, Barton. Do you want to be microphone manipulator?
I'm feeling liberated with my tie off, so I'll ask you a question if that's all right, Mark. I was interested in your comment about the positive experience you had in the regions with the number of great ideas being put forward. And I know you said you're not good at the politics, but an observation from the last federal election and the pending state election is that we're hearing the word innovation is a dirty word in regional areas. And let's focus on Queensland, where there's one nation which is... I'll use as the symptom rather than the cause, is attracting the scared vote, if you like. So I wouldn't mind if you'd expand on what your personal experience was in the regions about embracing technologies and innovation and entrepreneurship. Was it limited to a younger demographic, or was it more widespread?
No, it's widespread. I didn't see that. We didn't see that at all. In fact, we saw more of that in the cities than we do in the country. I mean, most of the regional areas have been exposed, particularly those that are more remote, Barton. So, when you're getting out to Goondiwindi and you're getting up to Mount Isa or somewhere, I mean, all of those towns have got industries that are high tech, and they're used to technology and they're used to innovation. I think the word innovation, unfortunately, it's a bit of a motherhood statement. Like, what does it mean? And I don't think it has much value. I think that so the way I've talked about today, and we don't need more innovation either, by the way. I mean, I've said this to government 1,000 times, Barton. I've said, innovation, ideas, research, that's one bucket. It's almost one side of the brain. And we've done so much trying to get new ideas. There's no shortage of ideas. Steve wears this T-shirt all the time. He's not wearing it today, which is execution is everything. It's commercialisation and development and entrepreneurship that we need to develop that. And so what we need are people that know how to take ideas and turn nothing into something. In the regions, I haven't seen that at all. I think that's a furphy. I think that's a myth, actually. I mean, I don't understand the polls. I mean, I've learned to trust what I see at the coalface, and I like to back test it. Probably we're meeting, though, with a group of people that are interested and engaged, so I've got a sample set, but I lived out in those places, and I don't think there's all this talk of fear around, job losses because of technology and innovation, and I just think that just fills pages. I don't think that's genuinely true. And if it is, then it's not very hard. The reality is it's not going away. Like, you're much better off embracing the fact that we don't control this. It's coming at us, and we better get ready for it, otherwise we're dead. And we might find that, that these things that are coming at us might come a bit quicker than we expect. Regional areas have had to innovate to survive. Where you find most of that rhetoric, I think, is in towns that are really suffering right now. I do think that there are a lot of Queensland regional towns that are suffering. I would argue that that's almost because when you see a boom in an industry, like we did with resources, it just drowns out, and probably appropriately see, the use of resources and talent in those towns, and you become very biased to one thing. So a lot of towns ended up with one big string to their bow. And what they've learned is, like the Sunshine Coast, is that actually you want to have a bunch of stuff that's not related to the same cycle. And so I think what we've seen in the regions is that there's some realisation of that. The worst town, the town that's suffering the most, though, is Townsville. When when we're backing businesses, I'll tell you the problem. For Townsville, we invested a lot in, and and it was a mistake in some ways. But the theory is that the more you invested in Townsville, because there's a lot of government money that goes into there and support. And the reality is when because of politics or financial need, or just bureaucratic delays or whatever, those things get delayed, then the town suffers, and that's where Townsville is now. One thing we learned is to not back businesses that rely on government for revenue. And I think that also applies to towns, is that they need to accept the government's not going to save them. That's not their job. And they should build a town and a business that doesn't rely on government to keep them alive.
We have time for one more. Who'd like to ask one more? Who has a burning question for Mark? Yes.
Blockchain ICO is a bit of a dirty word. How are you going to support those entrepreneurs while regulation is trying to squash them?
Oh man, I got a question on blockchain.
So this is about regulation choking.
Yeah. Let's talk about regulation. So yes, and even let's talk about regulation instead. Like blockchain, sort of. I understand the regulation that's coming there a little bit, but not enough to talk about that specifically. I think that even if you talk about regulation in tech in general, so around the stuff that's happening with Uber right now across the world, actually. Steve and I wrote to Uber to ask them to bring Uber. What do they call that stuff, Steve? The Uber airplanes? What is it? Uber elevator. You know they've got the drones that are now going to be. Our roads are so terrible. We just said, well, let's just bring some planes, and we asked them to come in. Imagine the regulation around that. So government regulation, it's really tough for governments because. So what I've seen in government is that you get one person that complains in writing to you, and there's nothing you can do, but you have to respond. And now and it's really challenging. So you can have 20,000 people that are ecstatic you've done something, and they're not going to write to you and tell you mostly, which is what human beings do. But the one person that isn't ecstatic writes to you, and you have to do something about it, because if you don't, then they go to the papers or somewhere else and say, we wrote to the government and got no response, and etc. So it's really challenging for government. The bias that I have seen, I think the bias over the last 10 or 15 years has been for us to over-regulate. And the argument always was, it's just one little regulation, it's not going to make a difference. But the problem was, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Is we've had so much regulation on regulation that the cost burden to business and the compliance burden is unbelievable. So what I've seen in government is I actually have seen a genuine attempt, at least in the department I'm involved with, is they're looking at stuff and going, how can we cut this back? How do we actually cut this out? And some regulations work and some don't, and that's their job. I sort of feel like if I look forward 10 years, do I think we're going to be in a more regulated world? I suspect that we're still going to be even more regulated then. So perhaps the skill that we're going to need to learn is to get more efficient at dealing with them, and that it's not going to go away. What that drives, unfortunately, is the institutionalisation of businesses, institutionalisation of universities, the institutionalisation of government, which brings in the permafrost, which means that the country becomes unproductive. I suspect that unless we get a crisis, that we won't get the tax reform we need, we won't get the regulatory reform we need, and so therefore the only way we're going to save ourselves is from entrepreneurs actually having a crack and breaking it open, and maybe breaking the rules a little bit, just a bit.
Thank you, Mark. Your last task will be to draw the Lucky Door Prize. Let's do that.
My Delvine Delaney. Oh, yeah.
Victoria Nichols. Elise Platt.
Victoria Nichols. All right. Cheers.
So the
Clint.
Civil Contractors Federation bottle of Henschke goes to?
Shane. No, well, eventually. To Clint Harvey.
Well done, Clint.
From Brisbane Performance and Development Manager from Brisbane Airports.
Well done.
Perfect.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Mark Sowerby.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Appreciate that
Thank
a
you.
lot. Please visit the Queensland Media Club website for a visual recording of today's speech, proudly powered by JPL Media. You can also visit our website to keep informed of upcoming speakers and dates, or to download past speeches. Who knows, there could be an election debate, for all we know. Just a reminder that our next event will be with the Federal Shadow Treasurer, Mr. Chris Bowen, here on Thursday, 2nd of November. Please, again, I'd like to acknowledge our naming rights sponsors, Brisbane Airport Corporation, Civil Contractors Federation and Griffith University, as well as all our other sponsors. If you'd like to receive information about the Queensland Media Club season, please drop your business card in the bowl at the registration desk on your way out. That brings us to the conclusion of our lunch. Thank you.